All right, good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started in just a minute here. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another Dignified Learning webinar. We're going to give everybody just another 60 seconds or so to filter in on time, and we'll get started. Yeah, it's 8:30. We'll be prompt this morning to respect everybody's time. Just a few housekeeping items for our webinar today. We love to hear your feedback. We love to engage. We've got a moderator watching our chat. So please, if you want to ask questions, jump in with feedback, or reflect on what we're saying today, just use that chat feature and we'll be able to respond to those if we have time. So good morning. My name is Matt Worthen, and with me today is Emily Miller.
Good morning. We're so excited to be here and to talk a little bit about dignified learning and hopefully give you some interesting takeaways and some learner-centered ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead and jump into our topic today. And one of the pieces that we say often is that training is painful, but learning is joyful. And that's really the center of our conversation. And so much about our content today is the difference between training and learning. And at the very heart of that is respect. And Emily, why is respect important in the learning process?
Well, you have to think about the individual who you are expecting to learn, right? What do they need? Because if they're not getting what they need, regardless of how important the information is, it's not going to matter.
Yeah, so you have to put yourself in their shoes. And what happens when you do that? Is there an outcome that we can expect in the learning process or for organizations that really believe in respecting learners? What do you think happens when you do that?
We're going to talk about that today,
Oh my gosh,
coincidentally enough. But
great.
really, if any at the heart of any training experience is the desire for the learner to make a behavior
Mm.
change in some way, and the prerequisite for a behavior change is learning. So if you want learning to occur, you have to start by thinking about what the learner needs and respecting those needs.
Yeah, and so organizations that follow this principle and make that investment and respect learners, they get a better outcome from their investment. They get learners that can apply that knowledge, right? Are we going to be talking about that today?
Absolutely. Learner buy-in is so important.
Wonderful. And as always, with our webinars, we love to give freebies. We give away as much as we can for free, and we love to invest in learning and promoting our core principles at Dignified Learning. So stay tuned for access to those free resources.
So this is one of our favorite questions to ask. Anytime we go to a conference or have a speaking engagement, we always start off by saying, what comes to mind when you think of e-learning?
Yeah, so if we'll give all of our active participants today an opportunity to use the chat because we love to hear from all types of organizations and learners out there. What comes to mind? What do you think of? Good, bad, indifferent, you know?
And be honest. Be completely honest. If your boss said you need to complete an e-learning training today, what would your reaction be?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll give everybody just a minute if you want to use the chat to give us your feedback. Again, we absolutely want to know what are you thinking about when you just hear e-learning or when your boss knocks on the door and says, "Hey, that course didn't get completed yet. You have to do it." What comes to mind? I would love to hear that from all of you. And again, we'll just give that just a quick second and see what our audience has to say today. And then we'll also kind of go through some of the most common things that comes about. But absolutely, Emily. So let's go to the next slide while some of this feedback is coming in and kind of compare what we're hearing to what we typically experience.
Yeah, so these are kind of the stereotypes and the default experience learners have when they're inside of an e-learning course. So there's a lot of robot voiceovers. There's a lot of videos, but they're not particularly engaging, right? A lot of times they don't even necessarily feel like they're made by a human. They're just kind of a boring PowerPoint with information just being read off of the slide. A lot of times they take way too long. There's a lot of multiple choice questions. There's no authentic feedback provided. And the key concept here is that it's a lot of passive learning, meaning that you as the learner are expected to absorb the information, and there's not a lot of opportunity for you to interact with it, which is the most important principle when you're talking about engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we find are that this slide represents those universal truths. Uh, we are watching our chat, and so much of the messages that we're receiving just validate what's on this screen. That that experience needs to really talk to you as a learner and represent how you want to learn and the information that you're trying to get.
So what's interesting is kind of regardless, we've done this talk around the country to many different audiences, and we hear a lot of the same responses time and time again. A lot of people instinctively just say, I really dislike online learning. Um, and training is just something you have to get through it. It's miserable. The information is just information, and we even had someone, I wrote this down when we had our clients say to us, training is really expensive. Nobody likes it, but you have to do it. And that's just the way of the world.
Yeah, and that is, we based on what normal e-learning looks like, and those previous comments, and then what we've heard that Emily just walked you through is really why dignified learning exists today. We care so much about how you present information, and we know that that matters every time you present new information. You are asking your audience to learn. And we know, just as we said at the beginning, training is painful, but learning, it should be joyful. So, learning is that first step to behavior change, right? As a leader, as an organization, as a trainer, as a coach, as a peer, what we're trying to do to improve each other is help one another change behavior in little ways that just help promote their professional life, their personal life, or whatever the topic is that we're exploring in our content.
Absolutely. Our brand is really about going back to the basics and trying to reimagine and get back to what's important in training, which is learning. So, we talk about this all the time because everything we do is very learner focused. So, what does it mean to feel respected as a learner? And when we ask this question, we typically get some emotional responses.
Oh my gosh, yeah. We oftentimes hear stories when we ask someone what comes to mind when you feel respected, or can you remember a time that you were a learner and you just really had a positive experience. And most of the feedback that we get from adults is that that took place when they were a young person, that when they were in school they had a wonderful teacher, and they can just remember that experience and remember the impact that it's had on their life. And while we can't create or recreate that every time, we believe that there are some fundamental elements that took place. There's a reason why you felt respected. And if we can unpack that just a little bit, I think we can really improve the learning experience that people have.
Yeah, and learning, just to clarify, is not academic, right? A lot of times we think we associate it with school or maybe with a formal training, but when you feel respected as a learner, you could be an adult learning a new hobby, you could be a 5-year-old learning how to tie your shoes, right? Think about those moments in your life when you were actually learning a new skill and what that felt like. So this really gets to the heart of what we love to do and what we are so passionate about. Because there is a difference between presenting information and learning, right? Those two concepts often get kind of colluded, and the assumption is that if you are presenting information, then learning will occur, and we're going to walk through why that's just not completely the case.
Yeah, and I just want to point out some of the comments and feedback that we're getting live. It's really wonderful. And one of the pieces that I think has stood out in the chat so far is that part of respecting the learning process is allowing the learner to raise their hand and say, I already know that. I want to move to what's relevant to me. And thinking through that when you're putting information together, when you're creating a learning experience is so important.
Absolutely. So, you know, how information is presented is our main principle when we go to put together a custom e-learning experience for our clients. And I like to say, the information is not just the information. Just like if you have a map and a destination, there's multiple ways to get to that same destination, and there's multiple methods you can use, right? Walking, biking, driving. The same is true for your information, and how that information is presented matters. We just don't often make that connection. And I can see, like, in the chat there's a really interesting comment. It says, well, it shouldn't be dry. It needs to take into account, what's going to be interesting to the learner. And that's exactly why we exist, really.
Absolutely. And I know this is kind of maybe a side tangent related to that topic, but one of the pieces that we discover in our work is that if you allow the subject matter expert to have their voice represent all of the information, oftentimes subject matter experts are so passionate and so full of information that's relevant and important, but they're not always thinking about just those key elements that the learner needs to take away from the training and go apply. They want to share everything they know. And so much of our job is filtering through that content with those subject matter experts and really thinking about application.
Absolutely. So I like to say this a lot: lack of information is not the problem, right? Because I just want to stop for a moment. And when we talk about behavior change and training and the need, a lot of times the misnomer is, well, if we just have this one additional training day, or if we just give people access to maybe an in-service day or something. uh, but
Yeah.
honestly, that's not the problem. I would challenge everybody to think through this, because at this precise moment, there's never been more information out in the world. We all maybe aspire to be excellent cooks, or, you know,
I'm not.
or, I mean,
I can't cook anything.
whatever desire you might have always had, I would challenge you that the reason you aren't succeeding at that goal isn't because it's not Googleable, right?
Mm.
So if we have all of this information, why aren't we using it effectively? And how do we use information in a more effective way?
Yeah, so this has been really complex, I think, so far in a way to process through how to apply what we're talking about today. So, Emily, I think where we're headed here is I want you to help our audience today really understand what that can look like and provide some tangible examples of that work.
Yep, we're going to provide some examples that don't cost a dollar, that
Wow.
anybody can do today. And we're going to provide some deeper examples if you're looking for some ideas on how to respect an e-learning experience specifically.
I'm going to need your help with that because I got a lot of room for improvement myself.
Well, as we get started, this is my favorite quote. This quote I think ends up in every presentation we do.
Yeah.
So you have to keep in mind a lot of times when we go and start talking about training and custom e-learning, subject matter experts will get will shut down and feel a little bit
Mm.
defeated and feel like, well, I'm not a teacher. I don't identify with that, right? But what you need to be aware of is that every time you're sharing new information, whether it's in an email, a presentation, a formal training, every time you share new
Mm.
information, you're asking your audience to learn. So understanding the principles of learning is going to help you tremendously in all different contexts.
And when you say every time you present information, you ask your audience to learn, I know this was on an earlier slide, but can you talk about presenting information outside of what comes to mind when we think of just e-learning? How else might we present information?
Yeah, so I would think about all the things that you just in your personal and professional life are asked to process through uh, and what that feels
Mm.
like. So every time you go to open your inbox, do you read an email and see that it's, paragraphs and paragraphs long and kind of shut down and go back to what you were doing? That's a great example
Mm.
of presenting information. And a lot of times, we're going to talk about this more, but the emphasis is on I just need to share this information, not how is my audience going to be able to process through, make meaning from it, and be able to actually implement what you're asking them to.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
So, like we said, there's information and then there's the learner experience. So, I would challenge everybody when we talk about respecting the learner, regardless of the context, to be thinking about first and foremost before you share your information, how can you make it accessible? How can you make it so that the learner reads or listens or watches and
Mm.
doesn't feel completely inundated and overwhelmed and diminished by that information?
Yeah, so we've talked in our previous webinars about some simple strategies in writing emails to help this process out a little bit. And so, if you're a first time viewer and new to Dignified Learning, I would encourage you to look back through our website. We have some great freebies that support today's topic as well, that really touch on some other practical ways that you can apply changing the way you present information and structure emails, and that's a really common problem that we see.
Yep. So, back to our main theme, training is painful, but learning is joyful. So, how do we make learning joyful?
Hmm.
These are the 6 pillars of dignified learning. And I like to really say it's impossible to have one if you don't have all of these, and it's impossible to have any of these without one. And so today we're really going to dive into respect. But like Matt said earlier, that freebie on our website really walks you through these 6 pillars and gives you some questions and some takeaways to think through when you are presenting information or planning an e-learning experience. So, what do we need to do to respect the learner? Let's get into these practical strategies.
Yeah, great.
So, we want to shift our focus in a very intentional
Hmm.
way from the information to the learner experience, right? And when we think about information, information is the primary focus when you're talking about most presentations, most meetings, most professional development. So we need the strategies to make that new information approachable. And just put yourself in the learner's shoes. How many times have you sat down and your eyes have glazed over during a PowerPoint presentation?
So just to be clear, Emily, what you're sharing now is that the most common practice is a focus on information, and that when training or meetings or professional development or presentations are happening, they're just so packed full of facts and so packed full of complex ideas that there's not much left for the learner to really focus on because there's so much coming at you at once. You're not really sure what to take away and how to apply.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason why today we're going to share what we've done so far, but then get into some real world examples and really share what this looks like and how to do it.
Exactly. So the heart of it, when you are focused on the information and you have a training or a presentation or an email that's just about providing the raw content, right? You're just providing the facts, like Matt was saying. What you're really doing is putting the assumption and the responsibility on the learner that they will take the time and have the ability to understand it and to apply it.
Wow.
When you plan for a learner focused experience, you are entirely focused on how you're going to structure that information for the learner. You are focused on how you can make it an efficient learning experience, how you can make it with ease, right? We don't want the learner to feel a sense of anxiety, a sense of overwhelm, and most importantly, you want to give them some practice and application. That's that engagement, that's that active learning, and it's going to give them an opportunity to really know whether or not they're understanding the message that you're trying to send.
Yeah, and just to kind of capture all of that so far, that's really why dignified learning exists. There are so many wonderful subject matter experts out there that have that knowledge and have that content, but it's really difficult to put yourself in the learner's shoes. That's a hard thing to do. And while we can show some strategies for that, if you're listening or watching and saying, "Gosh, this is a tall order. This sounds like a lot," I would just encourage you to reach out to us because we want to hear what's on your mind and we want to help you do this well.
Yeah, and it's especially a tall order when it's online learning, right?
Mm,
When it's in person, even if your information is dry or if your presentation isn't the best, you can rely on that real-time feedback. You can rely on
yeah.
body language. You can rely on your emotional connection with the learner, maybe. But when it's just the information and no one's there with the learner to be a guide or to provide any context, it's really important that your presentation is learner focused.
Emily, I think you just shared something that is so important. We could do an entire webinar just on that. The difference between in person training or teaching and what happens just because it's e learning. That simple change changes so much about what you have to think about in the approach. Is that right?
Yeah, because if you're a really strong presenter and you're in person, you can really overcome a lot of
Yeah,
challenges.
people think I'm funny in person. They don't think I'm funny online. Can you fix that?
I don't know if that's true. We'll have to wait for the chat responses to come
I
in.
don't
You
know.
know, I
Okay.
think I think you're very charming though.
It's
I think
better
it
in
comes.
person. It's better in person.
I don't know if that's actually true, but we'll see.
Okay. All
We'll
right.
see. I
All
don't
right.
know.
We
Hard
can
to
move
say.
on.
Yeah. But yes. So that's it's absolutely true. You can overcome a lot if you're in person. You can't do that if it's online. And we all know that, right? We all have started watching a
Mm.
video or opened an email or read a document and then we're like, I'm out. I know I should be doing this, but I just can't. It's
Well,
too much.
it's the MO, right? When you're using tech, you're just used to scrolling. You're used to processing. You're used to having a very short attention span
Yep.
because you're on tech, and that you have to be aware of because that's a universal truth. No matter what your content is, the learner is using tech to access that content, but they're also using the same tech for their free time and to do lots of other activities that aren't based on learning. And so if you capture some of these strategies, you might be able to capture your audience a little bit better.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of intentional things you can do, specifically when you're talking about online learning. But whether you're talking about in person or online learning and you want to respect the learner, we talked about some easy takeaways that everybody can do that don't require any
Hmm.
investment. And it's back to the basics, right? We talk about creating an environment for learning. And anybody who struggled with learning from home and helping their kids learn remotely this last year has probably really had to deal with this, right? Every learner, regardless of whether they are young or an adult, needs an environment for learning. And so often I see this get taken for granted and not really
Mm.
considered if the learners are adults, right? So even if you are talking about professionals, you still need to be providing them a designated space for learning, scheduled time, right? It does no one any good to be playing a video and have another tab open as they're actually doing their job. And really thinking about distractions and facilitating an opportunity for them to do the training with fidelity. And again, these are simple, but they are just so often overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely. It allows the learner to come back and revisit content as well. And that's one of the pieces that we can talk about is, if you miss something in e-learning, hopefully your system allows you to revisit that content and find it again.
Yep, for sure. So the second
Mm,
principle, which is universal, whether you're talking about in person or online learning, is you don't want to make any assumptions about your learners. And we see this all the time. Don't assume that they know how to navigate the technology if it's online learning. Learners might be on a mobile device, they might be on a laptop. There's an assortment of different ways that you can access online learning, and you have to think about that and make sure that it's accessible across those different devices.
yeah, that's something we're constantly doing at Dignified Learning. When content is created and published on our platform or on a platform that we're supporting for a customer, we love to go back and quality check that and just experience that on mobile, pull an iPad out, and try it on a few different computers because you just never know how the learner's going to be accessing.
Yep. And it needs to be easy to navigate and easy to come back to. And I will say a lot of times this gets associated just with online learning, but
Mm,
I would really challenge you if you have an in-person learning experience that you're facilitating, make sure that you're giving the learner some takeaways once they leave that training. Because we all know what it's like to walk out the door, even if it was a great training, and then just not have the bandwidth to go and implement it right away, and you forget and it just falls off your radar. And then the last really common component that we see that gets overlooked is, do learners know how to access the training?
mm.
If it's online, do they know how to log in? If your organization offers internal trainings, do they know those training opportunities exist? Do they know how to ask and raise their hand
Mm.
and say they need help with it? All of these really go a far way just in showing that you respect the learner and the process they need to learn that information. We're going to shift gears a little bit and talk through now some e-learning strategies
Great.
specific to respecting the learner, right?
Yeah, so this is kind of what we've taken and applied, and so we can show some of those examples today. Is that right, Emily?
Absolutely. So when I am thinking about planning an e-learning experience, it really doesn't matter who it's for, if it's for a younger audience or maybe an adult audience, or whether it's a mandatory training
Mm,
for credentialing or just a simple training to enhance a personal skill. We think about presenting information in different ways. And a lot of times there's the people have an understanding of different learning styles, which we're all capable of learning in different ways. We have our own preferences, right? Some people prefer to watch something or read or listen or maybe be a little bit more active. And I would argue that depending on the type of information, your learner might go back and forth, right? If it's something that's
mm.
completely new to them, even if they usually prefer to read information, watching it might be helpful. So you want to give them a lot of flexibility and a lot of opportunity to do that. And we're going to explore how we actually do this and what it looks like.
Absolutely. Yeah, go for it.
All right. So this is a great example out of one of our custom courses where this is for a nonprofit and they are training their volunteers. So the learner here gets a very learner friendly, approachable choice on how they want to learn about Envirotech. So if I click watch the video, you can see
Envirotech is a nonprofit organization
it's
whose
animated.
mission is to provide communities with access to technology through innovative and sustainable ways. Envirotech's mission rests on the foundation of education,
Looks great, Emily. I
sustainability,
love videos
and
like this,
community
but they
outreach.
look They look
With the mission
so
in
good. Do videos have to be of that quality every time, or is there any practical advice for our audience today about creating videos?
Oh, there's a ton of principles we can talk about creating videos. They don't all have to be animated with music and
Mm,
graphics. But I will say in our chat, the most
yeah,
important thing was that it has to be engaging. It can't be
gotcha.
dull. So even if you're just gonna record a low quality like talking head video, there's still a lot of strategies, and maybe we can talk about that in a
Yeah,
future
I
webinar
would love
that you
to.
can use.
Yeah, and again, if you're watching this and saying, "Gosh, I love this but need help," reach out to us. That's why we exist.
Yeah. So, we just looked at the
mind.
video
And
for just a minute, and if the learner had chosen the text, you can see they open up, they have the opportunity to read or listen to a narration. And look at the text on this page. It's intentionally designed to be approachable, right?
Hmm.
It's not size 10 font, really long, right? This looks like a completely doable, manageable amount of reading given the audience and the learners that we were designing this
So it
for.
sounds like there's a lot of different strategies at play here. So if you're wanting to learn more about a specific strategy or compare to a training that you already have in place, definitely reach out and share some of that training with us because we love to see trainings that are out there. And if you have an idea on how to apply one of these principles, we're here to help you do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so, click that.
Right?
So one of the other ways, so we giving choice is
Mm.
always a way of respecting the learner and their experience and letting them guide their own experience a little bit. The other way that's really specific to e-learning is you want to explicitly provide the learner some opportunities to apply the information, right? We all can relate to going to trainings and saying like, this is good information, but I don't actually know what I would do with it.
And this is one of the things that is sometimes difficult to do in person to this level, but e-learning opens the door to so many creative ways to talk about application in that training process, even though the individual, the learner is approaching e-learning individually, on
Mhm.
their own time or in their own space. Application can look so unique and different in an e-learning space. So can you show us a
Exactly.
little bit about what that
So,
might be?
yeah, we want to avoid learner confusion. We want to be actively facilitating an
Mm,
experience that allows the learner to make connections um, again and again, right? So, let's see some examples from one of our courses. Now, I love this course. This was an introduction to Google Docs that we made for one of our clients. And they really wanted experience where learners could practice, low stakes, come back to it. So instead of just watching a demo video about how to open a new Google Doc, they actually get to experience it inside of a course through a simulation
your
here.
goal is to open a blank new Google Doc. So go ahead and navigate this screen and know that there are several correct ways to open this Google Doc.
yeah, and so one thing to point out at Dignified Learning, we love to create simulations like this for any type of application or software.
Yep. So just to give you a little bit of the learner experience,
You did it. You
Wow.
opened up a blank new Google Doc.
and
But can you open up?
kind of the
You've
magic
made
of
it to Google
this
Drive.
is that you get
Remember
feedback
that your goal is to open a
Mm,
when you
blank
don't do
new
well
Google Doc.
or when you miss the mark in some way, and it redirects you. So all of those are really intentional instructional design decisions that we make together based on the goal that you have for your learners. But just think about how powerful any training experience would be if you had an opportunity to actually practice it before the training was even over.
yeah, as an ed tech trainer for the majority of my career, I can tell you that is oftentimes another emotional moment where people feel so vulnerable if they don't know, and giving them a space to practice that they can revisit and bookmark and come back to in the future just helps build that personal confidence that tech is not a barrier, but can be a useful tool. And if we can help bring some of that anxiety down,
Yeah.
it just opens so many more possibilities up for those who are interested in learning tech and need it for an element of their job.
Absolutely. And it also, there are a lot of learners, even if you provide opportunities to ask questions and follow up with them, eh, we've all experienced moments where we just feel stupid asking the question we don't want to, or we know we should know how to do it, but we forgot, or we never really learned it. And all of these kind of simulations really provide some resources for those learners and respect where they're at. Um, so really, we could talk about this forever. Respect is the foundation for all learning experiences. And I would challenge you to think about authentic learning experiences in your life and how you have personally felt like the person who is teaching you or showing you something recognized your needs as a learner, right? And really promoted the learning process for you. You want to talk a little bit about why respect matters?
Yeah, I would love to. We touched on it early on, but I hope that through some of these examples and practical strategies, that you're seeing respecting a learner means that learning is happening. You're allowing the learner that space, that time, and you're respecting that they might want to learn in a few different ways. And when you do that, you're helping the individual, which helps the organization. It really just supports the whole team, the whole organization, and the effort that you're putting into the material as a subject matter expert. If you respect the learner and the learner gets to receive that information and go out and apply it, then you've really won. You've arrived in a place where, someone can participate in your knowledge and just take a little piece of that with them. And so respecting the learner is such a fundamental component of that. And future webinars at Dignified Learning will always revisit respect. I think it is, as Emily said, it's one of those foundational components. You just can't have good learning without respect.
Yeah, and training is really expensive and you do have to do it. So you might as well get something out of it. And I think you not only will get that behavior change, but there is an emotional connection, a sense of loyalty that's established. There's a lot of science and research behind retention if you're talking about employee training. It opens a lot of doors that often get overlooked. So we're looking forward to next month's webinar. We're going to be talking about another pillar, one that's really near and dear to our heart, which is accessibility. And oftentimes accessibility, especially in online learning, doesn't really get thought of until after the fact, right? So you've invested in training, and then once it has been assigned to learners, you have somebody that raises their hand and says, well, this is not accessible to me. Either for a really practical reason or like a device.
You're just gonna keep yeah, that webinar is next time.
I know.
That's the next webinar.
But accessibility is a really important topic.
It is.
I'll save
it is a very
time.
important topic.
Okay.
Yes, but you got to save your content.
Oh, there's so much.
There's so much to say.
Share. Yeah.
So thank you all for joining us today. Again, use Dignified Learning. Take advantage of our resources. Take advantage of those freebies, both connected to today's webinar and previous webinars. We look forward to having you as our audience in the future. And thank you for respecting your learners and going through this journey with us to just encourage a dignified learning experience out in the world.
Yep. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
We'll see you next time.